Good afternoon. Welcome back to Black Press USA Live, Save Local Journalism number 19. This is the new generation. Today we have Patrick Washington of Dallas Weekly, the co-publisher. Continuously published without missing a single issue for more than 60 years, the Dallas Weekly has emerged as the leading, most trusted voice of the African American community in North Texas. The Dallas Weekly has been recognized and awarded for its impactful journalistic excellence, not only locally, but also statewide, regionally, and nationally. We also have Christina Holmes, the administrative assistant at the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder. The Minnesota Spokesman Recorder enjoys a living legacy as the oldest Black-owned newspaper in the state of Minnesota and one of the longest-standing family-owned newspapers in the country. And Lauren James, the youth editor at the Savannah Tribune. The Savannah Tribune has a proud and glorious heritage, a weekly newspaper covering news and issues related to Savannah's African American community. The Tribune, originally named the Colored Tribune, was founded and published its first edition in 1875. And the Tribune has always been in the forefront of positive efforts to improve the plight of African Americans and lift the entire community. Welcome, Lauren, Patrick, and Christina. How are you guys doing?
Doing well, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Great. So, since the ladies outnumber the guy, today we're gonna start. We're gonna do it the other way this time. We're gonna go with men first this time. Patrick Washington, Dallas Weekly. Patrick, first of all, could you tell everyone what you do for the Dallas Weekly and tell us a little bit about what you guys are covering now?
All right, what I do? Well, everything is a broad term, but my main focus is taking the Dallas Weekly and expanding its brand out to wherever media is being consumed, whether that be in the social space, the digital space, the mobile space, web space, traditional print, or anywhere we can possibly be seen, and trying to monetize those spaces. And what we're doing now is trying to create, I guess you call it branded content that can be distributed sort of on a national or global level that has more of a trendy feel, although it will be local content. Everyone's going through COVID-19 right now, so we do have that coverage, and we'll do stuff like what's going on locally, how national stuff affects, home, and of course us being in Texas with everything we do and don't do. There's a lot to be covered in that area, and amongst just the standard stuff we always did, which was standard news. We're in our community in South Dallas predominantly, the African American community, arts and entertainment. Some sports, so whoever's going on and what we can, business, politics, and broad spectrum. So
yeah, absolutely. We're gonna go to the southeast to the Savannah Tribune. Lauren James, the youth editor of the Savannah Tribune. Lauren, welcome. And Lauren, can you tell us a little bit about your position there with the Savannah Tribune and what you guys are up to lately?
Yes, so I'm the youth editor at the Savannah Tribune, and basically what I do is I write pieces bi-monthly to monthly about things that are going on in my life, and as a 15-year-old, there's a lot of things that aren't really talked about, I feel like, and so for me to be able to educate the African American community in Savannah and in Georgia as a whole, it's been a really great opportunity for me, and I'm just really excited about what the Savannah Tribune is doing and their outreach towards the youth, the Black youth in Savannah. And I think that including me and their team is a great way to start moving the generation down and starting to outreach to younger platforms and younger people through social media and using every platform they can to educate their community.
Wow, 15 years old, and you talk about the next generation. There you have it, folks. And we're going out to Prince Country, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Christina Holmes, welcome. Christina, tell us a little bit about what you do for the Spokesman Recorder and what you guys are working on.
Well, I'm just an administrative assistant, so
not just. You are an administrative assistant.
I primarily, I'm like right hand to my boss, so anything she needs, any calls that need to be made, any follow-ups, that's primarily what I'm doing. Also, a big thing that I'm mainly in charge of right now is I'm in charge of our archives. So I'm like in the back organizing our archives from like the 1930s to about 2010 was what I'm working on. So I'm like working on organizing that stuff. Because of COVID, some of the stuff we were doing, like we have the sister spokesman and different events that we hold that we're not able to do because no gatherings. So that's kind of been put to a hold, hence why I've been in the archives working on the old papers, older papers, issues, and like the photos. So that's mainly what I've been doing.
Wow. And, like I said, you started by saying just, but it sounds like your job is just as important as anyone else's. Patrick, you're the elder statesman of the three here. It must really, what does that do for you, Patrick, and to see that the Black press is trending toward the younger generation, I should say?
I think that's actually really inspiring because I was looking at the pictures on the promo and I was like, man, these kids look for like 15. And then she's like, 15. I was like, oh, good. I'm like, I'm not thinking I'm like some old head, but no, that's great because I think that there is a conversation to be had in the Black press about succession and how that looks and a tangible way to do it, and having teenagers even younger than that, especially family-owned businesses, is a great way to start that process and at least have it out there that it is, even if not organized in a nice, clean way, it happens sort of organically. That we're seeing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lauren James, 15, a lot of people are probably really impressed. What do you find that has really encouraged you, excited you, I should say, about the Black press?
Well, as you know, my grandmother, Shirley Barber James, is the person who owns the Tribune in Savannah. And when I was little, I would always see her working and see her editing and writing the newspaper and getting the stuff out on time and organizing it. And to just see that at such a young age, I was always kind of had this perspective of what can I be doing to educate my peers and educate the Black community. And so when this opportunity presented itself, I didn't even think twice about it. It was ultimately my goal is to educate people and to share my experiences that some people don't have the opportunity to know. And for Black press to be able to be sharing African American stories and Black stories in the US that I think are often overshadowed by big publishing companies and big newspapers, it's so important. And I really hope that my generation and even future generations can see the importance in having Black press in the United States, because it's imperative that we keep this going. And if I can have a small part in that, then I'm fulfilled.
Well, 193 years the Black press has been around. Christina, you mentioned that you're doing archives and you're going way back to the 1930s. Have you seen anything that really jumps out at you that perhaps surprised you?
I think the most surprising factor was that a lot of the stuff still happens, and especially with what's been going on the past couple months with the George Floyd incident that happened here, that it actually happened just a few blocks from my job. So it's a matter of like seeing that I guess not that much has changed. Like there's definitely changes. You definitely get to see like how certain stuff has evolved throughout time, like different advertisements and stuff. Like I'm really into like key details and different stuff just in general. So that's really cool to me. But just seeing like the different stories and seeing like that back then they went through like the same stuff that we went through now. Only difference is like we have the opportunity to have like our phones and to be more connected and to be there for one another in a way that's more immediate. So that would be more of like the surprising factor for me.
Yeah. And Patrick, Washington Dallas Weekly, we know you've taken over the publishing role pretty much from your dad, who is a very strong-willed manager. Now that you're in charge, what are you doing different than your father did?
I would say I do a lot more delegation. But also I have different tools to use. So it's kind of weird to say, what am I doing different? It's like, I'm doing the things that are different because he didn't have the opportunity to do them, so to delegate like a complete social agenda to somebody instead of having like to look over somebody's shoulder and do all the checks that you'd probably have to do with a traditional news staff, where there'd be like several different checks through it. I'm kind of saying, hey, make that happen, and it kind of rolls on its own because of just the nature of the technology that uses it. And trying to more so focus on the broader spectrum. I know like in the 90s and the early 2000s, obviously there was a lot of tumultuous stuff going on with 9/11 and then 2008. So Dad was a lot of times focused on keeping and maintaining the brand in the space that it had already occupied. And with all that being done, and he's continued to do that with his website, with all those bricks that he put in, it was, I won't say easy, but it was easier to then step on that and then say, okay, add this brick, add that brick, and keep moving forward. So it's kind of the same, it's kind of different. And the difference is really just because of where we're at right now. I'm working from home right now, which is something he could probably never do,
right.
in the time he was, so that's one of the things where it's like, that's what I'm doing differently. I'm hanging out with my daughter, and he was like, hey, baby, I'm going to see you later on at 7, click, and that's kind of what's the difference. It's kind of a blessing in a little bit that we've moved on.
And so Robert James writes in that Lauren James, youth correspondent for the Savannah Tribune, is representing the paper in this panel discussion about the next generation of Black journalism. #ProudDad.
Yeah.
So, and we got others. If we can bring up a couple more comments. Cedric Milliner. Hey, greetings, family. Blessings. Our youth on the move. Enjoy. Peace. Wanda Wood Knox, so proud of you. Okay, with Michelle, I'm sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. Peace and blessings. So, Savannah, what type of advice? Actually, what is the best advice you've received so far?
The best advice I've received so far, probably from my dad. He told me when I was writing a piece recently about why I protest, and I chose to go to several protests taking place in Atlanta, like Christina had talked about the George Floyd protest and the Breonna Taylor murder, and I wrote a piece about why I choose to protest, and I explained my perspective of it. And I was a little hesitant to publish it because I don't often give my opinions in writing and in such a formal matter and such a formal form. But my dad just told me, that I have to use my platform for my voice and to share my experiences and to share my opinions and to educate my peers and my family members and all of the readers of the Savannah Tribune. And I think that will ultimately be really important for me going forward, to just know that I'm just, by posting my opinions and by being active through the Tribune, I'm educating my community, and that's what I want to do. And because there's not going to be any change in America without teaching and educating people and sharing experiences. And if I can do that through my writing, then that's all I really want.
Well, we can see why your dad had the #ProudDad there.
Yeah, kind of cheesy.
Dad's looking over your shoulders, huh?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Christina Holmes, Minnesota spokesman recorder. Christina, I'm sure you've heard a lot of different advice coming into the Black press and working at the spokesman recorder. What would you consider as maybe the best advice you've gotten so far?
The best advice that I've gotten, it's hard to say, because in the process of like where I would have been like able to learn some stuff when all our editors were in the office, kind of COVID happened right before, and that happened right before what happened here in Minneapolis. So like everybody was kind of out of the office. So some of the stuff that I've gotten to learn has kind of been like in a short period, like kind of being more confident in what I want to do, kind of taking the opportunity to like talk to more people around the office and like get more ideas, and like more so just kind of like not necessarily eavesdropping, but kind of just listening in on conversations and just trying to like apply that knowledge to where I can, because they're busy a lot, seeing as most of our workers are out of the office, so everybody's like communicating through like computer and telephone, so everybody's pretty busy. So everything I've kind of picked up, just kind of like paying attention to what they're doing and trying to apply that to what I'm doing outside of it, because I don't do any writing for the paper, but I do my own writing that's mainly fictional, not journalism, but I do have the opportunity here, which is awesome. I get to like learn from that, and I get to learn from people that know writing, and so that's like the biggest like blessing to me, honestly. But
yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of hashtag proud somebodies out there for Christine. Patrick, we're not going to ask you what advice you get from your dad.
Time.
You know, Patrick's dad is James Washington of the Dallas Weekly and the Atlanta Voice, and one of our board members for the National Newspaper Publishers Association, and an overall great guy. This question is really for each of you, and actually you can kind of converse with each other on this. Lauren touched a little bit on some of the things happening today between the pandemic, civil unrest, economic uncertainty, and other issues. There's a lot going on. Can you guys share with each other and, of course, our viewers, your feelings on current events? And we can start with you, Patrick.
No problem. Well, it's kind of weird because I'm also like a fake history buff. So I'm interested in the cyclical nature of American hypocrisy. And it's like, if you go back about 20 years, every 20 years, you can almost see the same headlines happening. It's like, that's the amount of time it takes to forget stuff that almost happened like in your lifetime. And so when I'm looking at, for example, like the George Floyd thing, it's like, well, we see those almost a lot. Like, we see those like once a month. But the economic downturn that happened, we kind of see that with Republican leadership. Republicans kind of run economies into the ground and Democrats kind of bring them back up, and it kind of does that over and over again. But the thing that happened that I think is most interesting now is that all of those fail-safes, those securities, those branding statements that Americans tell each other, like we've got all this security, kind of fell away when COVID hit. And the fact that the government in leadership, which happens to be a Republican government, kind of publicly didn't do anything. And it wasn't like this was like 1975 when just the newspaper or the radio or the TV was their only sense of information. Everybody was spreading it so quickly, and like global news, how other countries were handling it, what was going on with the actual disease, the terms that American uses, like the economic status it was right before. And everyone kind of sort of like had this kind of aha moment of, oh, we're not safe. Like this thing could go apart immediately. And it is teetering there right now. And so I don't know what the exact feeling for it is, but my thoughts about it are just like, this is kind of something that everyone who's been watching politics, economics, and history over the last just 20 years could probably tell you was going to happen. This isn't the first virus we've had, like SARS and the bird flu and all that. About 20 years ago, we had that bird flu. 20 years before that was another one. It's like, we kind of see that, diseases kind of come out like this and we're never prepared. And now it's just hit critical mass. So like 2008 with the housing thing, it's like there's just these bubbles around America in every little industry and pocket that I think where everyone's kind of looking at, well, what's the next one? Because it just takes one. And I think the next one they're looking at is housing again. It's like we're back at housing. What was that, 2008, 12 years? Okay, cool. Yep. Like give or take, so that's what I'm sort of thinking about right now.
Wow. Yeah. Yes. Lauren, before you answer, let me just tell you that someone is calling themselves a proud grandma. Rosalind Payne Hill is a proud grandma.
Okay.
but yeah, grandma and dad, y'all making her blush. But Lauren, so what have your feelings been? Christina brought up the George Floyd for obvious reasons, and we'll get to her on that as well. But George Floyd, the pandemic, all of the civil unrest. What have been your feelings? Can you share some of your feelings?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm currently in high school, and we had just gotten back from spring break. And I mean, we had 2 days back in school, and they said we were going to be out for a week. And everyone's kind of excited because, no school, we're online, it's going to be great. Nobody has to do any work, anything like that. And then it kept spiraling on and on and on and on. And I looked up and we were in May and it was the end of the year. And my entire second semester was just gone. The dances, the sports and all of that just like poof disappeared. And then in May hit, the George Floyd murder. And for me, that was a moment where I realized, the world right now, it's not safe. Like Patrick was talking about, all of the bubbles were burst. There was unrest. People were in quarantine for, months on end. And then I think having this issue come up, I think that's what also made people a little bit stir crazy with the protests. And I think that's why some of them honestly got out of hand, because people were just trapped inside for so long, and having a place to put their anger and their angst and their anxiety and their depression that came with staying at home it's good for the message of Black Lives Matter and for the movement, but it also kind of, I feel like it explains a little bit of why they were so violent ultimately, because I feel like people were just tired and they were scared, and for, an innocent Black man to be knelt on for 9 minutes, right, begging for his life, and people seeing that on their screens and on news. And I think just everyone went mad, honestly, because it was insane for me to watch. And I can't even imagine how other people felt watching that. But I feel like quarantine, it ultimately drove this protest to be so big and such a movement, that I think, kind of disagreeing with what Mr. Washington said, that I think this is going to make some real change. I really do. The youth are involved in using social media platforms. Actually, like TikTok is a really big one right now. And I feel like this, I have faith and I have hope that this is it. Like, this is our moment. And I feel like our generations have watched the previous generations and what they've done and how they fought for civil rights. And I feel like we've learned, we've studied, and it's our time now. And I feel like we're ready. I do.
Wow. Well, before I go to Christina, we've had a lot of celebrities come on this stream for Black Press USA, and I just had looked to my right, and I was looking at Patrick, and he kind of put me in the mind of Snoop Dogg, and I thought maybe Norman put Snoop Dogg on for a second. I was like, wow.
That would be amazing. That would be pretty cool.
Get him on here?
Yeah, I just didn't even know Snoop Dogg.
Christina, so same question. A lot's been going on. You heard your colleagues in the Black press talk about it just now. Can you share your feelings on what's been? And you're right there, like you said, only a couple of blocks away from where the George Floyd incident happened.
Well, my feelings towards it was a really confusing time for a minute, especially with COVID, because it was just a matter of like, how do I operate? How do I go about my day-to-day life? I bus to work, so it was like, how am I just gonna get out of my house? I live with like my mom and my little brother, so it's like I was worried about a lot of things. Then this happened, the George Floyd incident happened, and I was going back to work that same week. So if it wasn't Memorial Day, I would have been there that Monday because I catch the bus there. So it was just like, for me, it was like super surreal to think about. And for me, it just it opened my eyes in a way that meant like take action, because I'm very like passive in a way. Like, I like to learn a lot. I don't like to speak on a lot of situations unless I have like the right amount of information, unless I'm like absolutely sure what I feel, whether it's right or wrong. So like, it just made me like have to, in a sense, like take more action and to actually like address certain things and to actually like be more proactive in reaching out and wanting to be involved for the right reasons and like having the right conversations around that. So
yeah. I wanted to bring that question up too from Robert James, a familiar person, right? For all the panelists, what experiences do you bring to your roles to help your papers be more relevant to your younger audience?
I'll go. I think they're self-explanatory a little bit. Like, they are the young audience. Obviously, I'm finding myself being more of like this situation where I'm kind of the old man in the room, even though I'm not 40 yet. And I've realized that generational identification has jumped to like where it used to be a generation was 20 years. Now we're kind of like into like tens and fives. And I look at that as similar to the technology too. As social media began to bubble up, there began to be generational splits as those entities through which we communicate and talk and act and live became faster or more interactive or whatever that may be. So personally, I always think about kind of my own personal experiences coming up under my father and what the I'd say the youth angst were, which was like, you're not listening to me, or you're not hearing it the right way, or you don't see it the way I see it, and trying to like just sort of eliminate that idea in the framework of content and marketing. So I like to actually engage a lot with younger people about things like where are they talking, where are they interacting with each other, how is that interaction being perceived, and how do we like once again step into that conversation and say, like Lauren said, I'm just trying to educate you on something you're already asking the question about. Like there's also a little bit of trying to bridge generations and make that a thing, because I do find that even with older generations from me, like the boomer generation, if you will, and even generations before that, there is a level of you're young, so don't actually talk that much, kind of listen more. And when there really should be a conversation of there needs to be equal listening and equal talking, because I've found that I'm in this weird generational gap too, like the 80s babies that are supposedly millennials that kind of aren't, it's like they're called old millennials, but it's like, well, how are you old? Or, it's like, because you're born in this time when the things that are becoming technologically routine were being built, and the people who saw them were then seeing them as they were. So we were like, I was raised on the internet as the internet was being built, as opposed to a person who was maybe like my sister's age, who had the internet her whole life. It's like, so I saw it as a tool. She's like, this is how I live. And that conversation gets studied with generations of, well, I want to use the internet to produce content. And they're going, this print product is where we make our bread and butter. It's like, I'm not saying it's not, but there are opportunities in this place that I can take on that sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes are not given to the younger people because of, I don't know, lack of, understanding or, confidence, whatever it may be. But I'm trying to also bridge those gaps of saying there doesn't need to be an educational gap. There needs to be some support and confidence in the tools that young folk do already, and give them some control and power of those things to then expand the reach of your brand, the Black press in general, and just the communication between our communities. I know I talked a lot with my dad.
No worries, Patrick. Lauren, I'm going to let you answer your dad's question. Speaking of dads, I'm going to let you answer your dad's question.
Oh, and Lauren, it never ends. Don't think it stops. You got another always.
Right. Yeah. So, I've been at the Tribune. I've tried to include pieces on. I did a piece on school shootings, which I thought was really important for older audiences to understand the stress that goes into that. I mean, I go to a private school in Atlanta, and it was this random day in March, and we had a lockdown drill, and it was not a drill, it was serious. And I just remember the fear in that classroom that, am I going to die today? And that should never, ever happen. And it ultimately ended up being somebody, I think, robbed a bank and then ran through our campus, but it was, arbitrary. But, just that fear, that being in that moment, that I feel like a lot of older generations don't know and aren't exposed to that feeling. And if I can teach them, and like Patrick was talking about, just educate, and it goes both ways. If you tell me about your experiences, then I can tell you about my experiences, and then we can have this mutual connection and learn from each other. I don't know how to run a business, so please teach me, and maybe you don't know how to use TikTok, so I can teach you that. There's these things that I feel like are so separate and divisive all the time, and if we can just come together and unify, then that's my goal. And so if I can teach you, and and you can understand my experiences, then maybe we can all have a better, mental picture of everybody else's experiences.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, Christina Holmes, Minnesota spokesman, recorder. Same question, Christina, from Robert James is for all of the panelists, for all of you, what experiences do you bring to your roles to help your papers be more relevant to younger audiences?
I just bring my knowledge of knowing how we interact. In a way, like I know that social media is the main form that everybody communicates. That was like honestly like the best thing, and like also in a way some of the most draining things as social media can be. Because when the incident happened, that's how I found out about it. I found out on Facebook. The video got shared around on Facebook, and then from there it wasn't like it stopped there. It was like all the progress, all the stuff that you need to do, all the videos of like people that don't even live in Minnesota coming here and destroying the neighborhood. Like I got that all from social media. I didn't get that from the news. I didn't get that. So it was a matter of like I was sharing that, my friends were sharing that. I had friends that were at the protest and were going really regular, so they had lives of like stuff that was happening in that moment. And it was just like, so I bring that knowledge of like knowing that's how people communicate. In a sense, I know how they're going to talk to each other, how they respond, what in a way what's going to make them more interested, because it's not like you want to bring it to them in a form that's like, bubblegum. In a way, like you don't want to like take away the integrity of it to make it more appeasable, but you want them to like genuinely like it and genuinely know why they should want to keep coming back to it. So I bring that knowledge. And for me being like a person of my age who has an appreciation for so many different factors, whether it be journalism or like just older stuff in general, like I just appreciate those things. So it's just a matter of like whoever I'm around, I'm going to talk about that with. And it might not be a conversation that they would have had before, or they would even take like any time to have or even care about. But because we're talking about it, it's something that when I see them again, they're going to bring it up. They're going to talk about it more. They're going to ask me, they're going to maybe like call me as a reference point, even though like I'm not an expert, for another conversation, because now it's carried over. So that's like the best thing that I got to add.
Yeah, absolutely. And Christina, I know Lauren had mentioned being a part of a protest down in Atlanta. How important do you believe, Christina Holmes, is it that young ones, I mean, Lauren, we know is 15. How important is it that young ones are a part of these protests?
I think it's extremely important. I think the younger that you can show people and the younger that you could put that, then the more that people are going to be willing, and you can pass that down. Like you can make them want to do that. Like my parents didn't teach me about like protests and stuff like that. Like most of the stuff like I've grown interested in is stuff that I learned about on the outside, but it was somebody older that had to come and show me, because otherwise I wasn't gonna be as interested. Like I have a brother that's 19 and he's younger than me, and he didn't go to any protest, but I did. So
Right.
it's just, and it's not that he didn't find it important, but it's like he's a certain age, so it's like he understands that it's important, but it's not, he doesn't see why it's so important in a way. Like, and especially at that age, like he's not gonna put together like I can vote, I can go down to these places, I can have a voice, I can like he doesn't put that together. So for me, it's just a matter of like, I guess being able to do that. Like for me the protest was like really important because it just shows you so many different, like you'll learn a lot of different stories, like something that I went through somebody else might not have ever gone through, something that is like a super extreme for somebody else might open my eyes to be more patient and more tolerant and to listen more in a certain situation. So I thought the protests were extremely like powerful, and especially like here in Minneapolis, like I know like a lot, and that was my thing about why I love social media in a way. It like whenever I went on there, I had to take a break because it was like it just drained energy out of me. I was just super tired, like
Yeah.
because it was just like you just put your full self into it. But when I went on there, it was great because the protests here were getting a lot of bad raps for saying people were being like unnecessarily violent, and that wasn't the thing. Like people, most of the protests, most of the people were peaceful, and they went there with like peaceful ideas and peaceful intentions and peaceful actions. And it was actually people that were coming from like a Wisconsin or wherever and driving into or a whole different county way up north, and they wanted to loot and get free stuff, and they're getting put together because they look like they're a part of it, but they're really not.
Yeah.
So like
Right.
that's one of the things I liked about the protest, because it actually stuck to what it was there for. Like, I didn't see any videos of anybody or any like, and even when I went, I didn't see no altercations where people were like in each other's faces. Like, it was just positive the entire time. Like, people were giving out free water, people were having conversations, people, there were chants going on. So it was a really great environment, a great experience in my opinion. So
wow. Yeah. And I know that Patrick has talked about the generations really in a great way already. But is one of the biggest differences between this generation and prior generations the fact that this generation is immediately global in its outlook?
Maybe.
How about sense?
I want to say maybe. I mean, it tries to in a way it can do that to a way that it seems dishonest, because you're doing it because it interests you and not because you know about it. So in a way that does happen, but it does show people stuff globally. Like when the George Floyd and everything was being shared, like Breonna Taylor, all these different things were being shared. Like there was like stuff about Yemen and like stuff about like, Hawaii and like different lands. So like all these like different stuff across the world that wouldn't come to mind any other day or any other time have been coming to me. And that's really cool about the internet, is that I can actually know about these things instead of like, say I go to these places and I'm just going to be a tourist, or I'm just going to like not really have that awareness or that respect for the land that I'm walking on. Like it just brings that perspective to you. So
yeah. Patrick, Lauren, you want to weigh in?
Okay, I completely agree with Christina. I think that having social media platforms where you can click a button and reach, millions of people on hundreds of different countries and continents, and it's a really powerful tool. But I think, like she also said, it can also be used to spread hate and to spread misinformation. And so you have to be really careful as to what your sources are, who you're reading it from. Is this really accurate? Is this really going on? There's a lot of questions that come into your head, but I would have never, people aren't showing the crisis in Yemen right now. It's not on the news. I would not have known about it if it hadn't been through social media and if it hadn't shown up on my Instagram feed, or like she said, these lands that were stolen from Native Americans. We don't get taught that in schools. It's not part of the schooling system. It's not part of the education system. They barely teach, Black history in schools, let alone the history of Native Americans. I didn't know Christopher Columbus was a bad man until I was at least 10. That's something that the educational system in America doesn't teach you. And so for social media to be able to exploit those falsehoods and that preconceived information that's just been like being tapped into our heads ever since we were little, for them to be able to expose the true hatred behind some of these historical figures is extremely powerful. And I wouldn't have known that if it hadn't been through these platforms, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter. It's such a powerful tool that's being used globally. And I think it's incredible to see how many people around the world can get passionate about a project and can actually make real change. And that's also, sorry, I'm talking a lot, but that's also one of the reasons why I feel like, this is going to be different, because like Patrick was talking about, when he was growing up, he was being raised when the internet was being born as well. And I was raised on the internet, and I know my little cousins and people are way more internet technologically savvy than I am, and they're 4 years old. So I think that's just a really powerful tool that hasn't been seen in past generations, even with millennials. The power that Generation Z has, which is my generation, at its fingertips to spread this information is ultimately going to be the difference, I think.
Yeah. Patrick?
It's weird, yes, I agree with both of them. And to add to it, it's a little interesting because I'm also looking at it from, like she said, the person who saw the internet being built as it was being built. And I will admit, like, I have a 2-year-old, 3-year-old in a month or two, who can use an iPhone like you can. And I'm sitting there staring at him in awe, like, how does a 3-year-old, learn how to find an app, look his video up? Like, he's not messing it up. He's like, I know exactly what I'm doing, and he's barely learning to talk. You know what I mean? And so, but at the same time, I'm also looking at some of in their mid-20s, like that generation right there. I don't know which one that is, I or Z or whatever. But it's the idea that this social space becomes real because you make it real. And therefore, it has its own consequences. Like Christina was saying, it's like, well, once you've identified this is real, like I get information from here, I socialize on here, I have friends on here, then that thing can become the influence to you. And that's when I think we, as a Black press entity, need to be very hyper aware and maybe even create some standards of our own of how does this social media tool actually work and how do you evolve with it? For example, I don't think anybody in my generation would have told you TikTok would be the defining factor in toppling Donald Trump's convention. I don't think anyone would have said, oh yeah, it's definitely going to be those guys that do the dances for 10 minutes and like they're going to, but that was the thing. And then you start to realize, because people aren't necessarily organizing like we used to, which is maybe in a physical space, maybe in some kind of metaphoric event. But this was something that was in an intangible space that had tangible value that ultimately was reacted to like it was a real protest. I mean, not like it wasn't, but in that there were people there. These were people who bought tickets virtually, did not show up, and then that becomes the silent protest. It's the same, but it's different. You know what I mean? And only a 15, 14, 13-year-old could tell you that. And I don't even think they could actually articulate what I just said in the way I said. They're like, this is going to work. But it's a silent protest. In a boomer generation, that would be what it would call. But it's now done differently. But that can also be usurped. So I think that it's this really cool tool that has a lot of power, but there's no real controls around it. And so it takes the individual to say, I am able to decipher between misinformation, or I'll do the extra step to say, that came from a person's Twitter. Let me go look up the source of that thing. And if it comes back to a news source, it can be considered valid. And that is what I think we need to, as a Black press, need to start to promote, is being the source of that social media buzz. Like Lauren said, she's a youth editor talking about a school shooting, which is crazy because I never thought about the entire generation of 15-year-olds know that a school shooting is possible. We were, in my generation, thinking that could happen because of Columbine. That was the one time that was like, oh yeah, that school in Colorado had that thing. And then a generation later, it's like, that could happen at your preschool tomorrow. And they're all going to school with that knowledge. That's insane to me. Like, I don't know what that's like. And it's like, but in an essence of being able to have someone talk about it in a space where you might not even be looking at it means that there's an opportunity there to address it. And I think that's where my generation, which I guess is millennial, should be taking those steps to push that information forward, like saying, give your social media team some clout. Go give them some things to say, become the source, be on the scene, use your phones. Don't use those old techniques of checks and balances. Here's a new one. And it's faster. Use that TikTok, or have the company TikTok have something that has some value to it that is controlled by the people who use it. Oversight. I think that elders teach, like Christina said, there's a hunger there to be taught, but there needs to be a willingness to be respected and to be supported in what you don't know, and admit that you're ignorant in some places. And that's where I think all of this conversation kind of culminates in, let's all just work together, but it's going to take some what do we all, because we're all fathers and sons and daughters and mothers and things like that, as Lauren's found out in this stream, that you can't get away from. You're a child in the office. I'm 37. I'm a child in my dad's office. I get it. I don't think that it's a bad thing. But it does come with sometimes, sit there and do what I say because I need you to. And it's like, not this time. I need you to do what I say because I run the media part of it, or whatever it is, And I know we've had that conversation with some are second, some are third, some are fourth, the generational publishers, and how that comes into management and execution of ideas and growth and succession. And so, yeah, I know I said a lot, but the global outlook, I think, is really a reaction to them. They're living a global world, you know. It's like what you said, the Yemen stuff, that was around when we were, you know, you could find that information. But was the world going to react to you as a 15-year-old in 1997 saying, hey, this is crazy, someone should do something about it? It's like, no, because there's no global platform for you to speak to. You know, so now I think it's like the opportunity for you is, and they're taking advantage, which is great. But we need to also be supporting that by saying, hey, there's this stuff going on too. Maybe y'all can get together in your communities and do something about the stuff happening locally and have it have global reach, you know, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. Lauren, you wanted to say something?
Oh, I was just going to add on to Patrick talking about, I think also the youth has a responsibility to respect the older generations and where they came from, what they went through, the trials and that they had to go through. While they may be similar to ours, they're not the same, and we have to understand and respect that. It has to be, I think it has to go both ways, and we have to have a mutual understanding and a mutual need and want to be taught by each other in order to kind of bridge that generational gap, because I don't think it's going to happen unless the youth stand up and we say, hey, please tell us about this. I didn't know about this. You know, I sat down with my grandma the last time I was in Savannah, and I asked her about her childhood because I didn't know about that. And I recorded it so that I can have that, so I can teach my children about that. And it's something that we have to ask questions, because they may not feel like we want to know. Because if we don't tell them, then how are they going to know that we want to know? Right. You know? And so I think going off of Patrick, what he was saying is it just has to be both ways. You know, it has to go both ways.
And just to piggyback one more time off what Lauren said, my wife actually has had that same feeling of when the George Floyd and the protests were happening. She felt like just calling her grandmother. And so they've been having these conversations, and she's been enlightened about like just what Lauren said is like they've been going through the same stuff but different. So they have similar feelings but different ways of reacting, and we're hoping to put those out in some ways because her grandmother was a little bit let's just say open with her language thing. But I think that's something that I think that as a press organization we could do. You know, we're all, a lot of us are generational. We can just have simple like this. They like me and my father, Lauren and her father, you know, and her grandmother, talking about topical things from the perspective of a generational thing. And I think that's great. I think that that would be awesome for us to do and think about.
Christina, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I think it's, I think it's, I agree with the both of them. I think it definitely takes, it's going to take work on both sides. As somebody, like I'm 24, so like I hang out, like I'm not like the biggest social person. I hang out a lot with like my older family, with my aunt and my mom and my grandma. Me and my grandma, we don't like see eye to eye, but once the George Floyd incident occurred, like we had a lot of things in common as far as like the things we wanted done, our anger, which like she's usually the first person to tell me like, oh, you can't like be mad that way, or oh, you need to like, you know, just don't be mad. Like she always tells me to like kind of suppress it, or just kind of like, you know, just kind of think happier. But she was enraged by it too, and she felt like that was a time for us to have like an equal conversation, because usually it's like she's older, so she always wants to tell me things and she doesn't want to listen to why I feel that might not resonate with me in a sense. But because of this, we've had a lot of opportunities for talking. But when the George Floyd incident happened, for me, I really wanted to be around like people my age. Like I wanted to be around like people my age and people that I'm close to, because it was just like one of those situations where I wanted to be around them. I wanted to know that they were okay. I wanted to be able to like hear their thoughts and things, and I wanted to be able to have that conversation in case, like, say they drove to the store and they got pulled out of their car and I wasn't able to have that conversation. So it was a big manner of I wanted to be able to talk to the people on both of my sides. And what I've learned from that is like it's gonna take a lot of hard work to get like a younger and an older audience together to have a cohesive conversation, because even when it's certain situations where one tidbit from the other side gets into the other side, it's like this big thing kind of goes on and nobody's really being heard. So for me, I've taken the opportunity to listen to both sides, to take each thing that's being regarded and kind of like and put it into my own perspective, but also trying to create situations where it might be easier and a lot better for future times if that was a regular thing, if we got together and we made this what's the word I'm looking for, sorry, made it like a
Come on, journalists, help out.
and like we just made sure that we were getting together, we were having conversations, getting out in our communities, talking to different people. I live in Maple Grove. I work in Minneapolis. I was born in Minneapolis, grew up here, but I live in Maple Grove right now. That's like super suburban. And my family primarily lives in like suburban areas like a Brooklyn Park or Coon Rapids. So that's like mainly like a white population. So even us having those conversations, it's like I have to drive to a certain town to get that kind of energy, because it's like I'm here, I'm in Minneapolis, I get that feeling, I understand that, like I feel that like oneness, but then when I get out to where I live, it's not that. That's not the vibe you're getting. You're not getting like everybody's like, we saw what's happened just a zip code away from us and we're with you. It's more so like the same kind of silent racism where I live. Like it's like people don't really look at you, people don't really talk to you. They'll give you a wave, but they'll watch you the entire time. It's kind of like one of those things. So it was like, for me, it was just like, I want to make sure that there's an opportunity for older and younger people to talk, because like I said, I mostly hang out with older people. And once I do get with people my age, I kind of feel out of place because I have that knowledge. And sometimes some of the things that they're melodramatic about, I don't really agree about. So it's like, I don't know. So I would look forward to the time and when we can create a space where everybody can just kind of look at it from what's going to be the next step, as opposed to I know this from this time and you guys are just jumping into now, or nobody's like, or my generation being like, well, nobody even does that anymore, this is how we're like. I just think it needs to be more of a discussion. I think there needs to be a cohesive action that's taken with that, like, and those are just my thoughts.
Well, hey, outstanding thoughts, if you ask me. Now, in a few moments, in the few remaining moments, I should say, that we do have left, we did want to ask, you guys are essentially three journalists. What question would you ask the other member of the panel?
I'd probably ask both members, where do you think from your generational perspective that the Black press needs to be and be prepared to be in the coming years?
For me, I think it needs to be more interactive with the community. With social media, that's like the coolest thing, because you have the opportunity where you can literally be interactive. You can give your password and your email account for your social media, and then you could have like, neighborhood takeovers where somebody goes and they like showcase different things in different neighborhoods, different areas. Like I think there's going to be more of an opportunity for that. I think it should be. That's one of the biggest things that because I've seen brands do it all the time. So I haven't really seen any news outlets do it, which like confuses me, because it would make more sense. It's like a brand is just doing it to show off like some lipstick, whereas like this is actually like to get people to know about their area, to know about the people in their area, the businesses they can support and different things. So like that's one of the first things that I think of that come to mind, but I think it's like a big thing that could be taken into the future.
Right. I definitely agree with Christina there. I think that for the Savannah Tribune specifically, and I think this goes for all Black press, advertising. I don't think a lot of people know that we're here and know that we're working and that we have platforms, we have community events, we're on social media, and I don't think people know about it. And at this time, in this current time where people are like, oh, I want to bank Black, or I want to give money to this people, or Black, like we're trending currently. So let's use that to our advantage. Let's get, the word out about our newspapers, our organizations that have been here for, 100+ years. We're here, but I feel like people, specifically my age, like none of my friends, know what Black press is, whether they're, African American or not. Like, it's just something that people don't know. And so if there's a way for, whether that's through community outreach, through social media, through billboards or radio stations or podcasts, even, just a way to kind of get it in their faces, flashing, hey, we're Black press, hey, we're here, and these are our stories that we're telling. I think that's ultimately going to bring Black press through the generation and kind of fill that gap that I feel like is kind of here right now.
Yeah, excellent. Patrick, you obviously, you've been passed down, the torch has been passed to you. And so all the things that Lauren and Christina are mentioning here, how valuable is that, Patrick, for you going forward?
It's extremely valuable, and I think it's more valuable for people outside of this conversation to hear. Like, that's one of my key metrics is, and especially as I try to maneuver my way through the NNPA a little bit more because of, just being where I am, there are those conversations. I don't know those. That's why I asked, like, I don't actually know where we should be going. I have an idea, but that's just for me looking out and going, here's where I look. But like Christina and Lauren are looking in different spaces and they're saying, no, you need to be here. And I like that they said interactive, because it's been my thought too, that there has to be some sort of touch point to our brands. Like, we're going to be doing a virtual beer tasting locally soon. And that came from one of our content managers who then wanted to move into a sort of a marketing side, said, hey, I think I can do this. And I really was just like, let me see what you got. And he's organized it. It's going to be online some kind of way. We're streaming it, or, they're going through all the different levels of streaming. And it's like, it's going to happen. And I'm like, I have no idea where that's going to take us. But it's fun because that's the best part. I have no idea where that's going to take us. I like the idea of a neighborhood kind of virtual interactive kind of thing. Maybe not giving out my password and all that, but allowing somebody to, showcase like our neighborhoods here, Pleasant Grove, South Dallas, West Dallas, Oak Cliff, North Dallas, et cetera, and just seeing it from a more of a community standpoint, or even having those virtual times where we have a lot of connections to our local government. We're thinking about having like a set time, maybe twice a month, where the public can literally be like, here, chime in, here's the link, ask your questions, have that person interact directly with people of the community, and have our own forums. But all this has to happen with the idea that people like the young ladies we have here understand the technology, have the passion to do it, and understand the history and longevity of what we've been doing and why it's important, so that it all kind of deals around this wonderful thing called the Black press, and it can become a thing. Like, I think, Stacey, I'm gonna say this right now, the NNPA right now could be web-based CNN with just what you're doing, with what you're doing. If you could get all 243 people to just say, can you get a laptop and some decent internet connection and have some words to say about national topics, how are we not that? You know what I'm saying? Like, and then with our reach, you move into the continent, the Caribbean, Latin America, Europe, those stories are still the same. Like they said, Yemen is a story, but there's an African population in Yemen that is being oppressed like African Americans in America. There are African peoples of descent in India, in Southeast Asia, in Europe, all over South America that are doing exactly what we're doing in smaller bubbles. They don't have the internet access. They don't have the 193-year history, but they have a phone, they have a social media platform, and they have a passion to tell their story. I think that's an opportunity for us to say we can be the Al Jazeera of African Americans. Get a bunch of people with cameras that the white folk can't go to, and all of a sudden you're more viable than anybody that can happen in those areas. Minnesota has become a hotbed. I guarantee I've called, hey, what's going on up there? I got friends up there. They went to school up there. I'm calling them like, wait, what is happening? And it's like they've got all the scoops because like they're on the ground. They're not the establishment. They're not the system or the man. They're real people. They're real Black people. So they're being honest with you. And I think that just echoing what these two young ladies said is that, interactive is the way to go. I think that hearing that coming from you, it validates my suspicions. And I'll probably put in plans to do more of that in the future. So yeah, that's why it's very valuable. I hope everybody listening is in the is doing the same thing. You've got a niece, you've got a nephew, you got a daughter or a granddaughter. Put them to work. Put them to work, and tell them they're gonna be on social media all day. I guarantee you they won't be that mad. You know?
Words of wisdom from Patrick Washington of the Dallas Weekly. We can't sign off without first hearing Christina Holmes of the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder. Your parting thoughts. What is the one thing that you, and I'll ask Lauren James of the Savannah Tribune the same question. What is the one thought you want to leave those who have been watching today, and just those throughout the Black press? What's the thought you want to leave them with today, Christina?
Probably to just communicate more with the people that you wouldn't expect to. Have conversations that might make you uncomfortable or might be uneasy. Talk to people that you might not feel like you want to, because you might. It's just, I feel like this is a really good time for learning. I feel like it's a good time to have conversations. Like Patrick had said, like it's a good time for that. It's a good open area for that. A lot of people want to be heard, and so they're willing to talk to somebody that's going to listen at the end of the day. So I just feel that should be like the first foreground. And like I said, not just having conversations with people that you're used to, but having conversations with somebody that's perspective that you might not think of in any sense. Like, just make sure that you're having those uncomfortable conversations you're trying to work up and work past. And even if it's an injustice that you might not face, like, think of something that might bother somebody close to you that it might affect, you know what I mean? So yeah, stuff like that.
Great. And Lauren, same question.
Okay. I'd probably say, kind of like Christina and Patrick were talking about, I think it's time to modernize. It's time to reach out and build up your community using the resources that you have, using, you know, the people that you have. And I think this series that y'all are doing is kind of one of the first steps. Like, I think it's incredible that y'all are gathering young people in Black press to talk about these issues, because I feel like it's often overlooked and overshadowed. And so there's a way for older generations in Black press to say, hey, maybe we should have somebody younger come on board and just tell us stuff, teach us stuff, tell us what we can be doing better in our communities, because, hey, I don't know what 15-year-old girls are doing right now. Like, I don't know. So could you tell me? You know, just asking those questions to your community, and ultimately I think it'll build connection. And it's just, you know, the goal of news is to educate people. And so if we can truly use our platforms to educate and reach out and, you know, build people up, then that's the goal here. And I think that all, you know, Black press should be really focused on that going forward.
Absolutely. Well, you've been watching Black Press USA live with the next generation, and I tell you what, if you leave here unimpressed, then the problem's on you, because these young ladies, and of course Patrick Washington, been extremely impressive, and it looks like the future is in great hands. Thanks for joining us, Patrick Washington of the Dallas Weekly, Christina Holmes of the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder, and Lauren James of the Savannah Tribune, and our entire fan club that came along with her. We appreciate you guys. Thanks so much. At 3:00 on Wednesday, we will be talking with Representative Val Demings, who is on Joe Biden's shortlist for vice president. So stay tuned for that on Wednesday at 3:00. In the meantime, stay well, stay safe, and thanks a lot for joining us.
That's my face.